Yeah, scary stuff. And you would think very unlikely in Georgia, but it's happening. See for yourself.
Big cat sightings caught on camera in other states.
Clear as day, no doubt about it. Posted it on social media. Everyone pretty much loved it because there's no doubt on what it was.
The DNR's website even states in the last 25 years, there have been 3 credible mountain lion sightings in Georgia. The department later edited the post.
Last year, there were 6 confirmed sightings in Tennessee.
The species hasn't been seen here for about 100 years. But since September, TWRA has confirmed 6 different sightings of cougars or mountain lions in the state, including 2 new confirmations just last week.
Okay, so what the heck is going on with all these recent eastern cougar sightings? Here I'm hopefully going to be able to answer that question, in addition to teaching you a whole lot more. If you did not know, the eastern cougar was declared extinct in 2018, but sightings still persist till this very day. Are these western cougars, having simply migrated from other states, or are these legendary eastern cougars still around? Before we reveal the true secrets about this mysterious big cat, I gotta get something out of the way. For the sake of simplicity, I'm only going to be calling this species a cougar. I know they go by a trillion other names, and if you want to call them that in the comments, then be my guest. But for the sake of simplicity, doesn't matter if it's the South American puma or the Florida panther, I'm going to be referring to the puma genus as a whole as cougar. And now that that's finally out of the way, I'm going to say this for a matter of fact, there are cougars in the eastern half of the United States, beyond just Florida. But the real question is, are these eastern cougars, or are they simply just vagrant migrants coming from the western half of the United States? Or what if it's both? While highly controversial and despite morphological differences, the eastern cougar, western cougar, and Florida panther are currently all classified as the same subspecies, with each of these 3 populations now mostly being considered localities, though this decision is highly controversial and is likely going to be reversed in the future, due to many accusations of this change mostly being in order to save money and prevent conservation, as sadly a lot of people don't want to protect a species which requires large amounts of land in order to sustain itself and will often occasionally prey on cattle. And since the western cougar isn't protected, having all 3 subspecies under the same name could help give lawmakers an excuse not to protect the eastern cougar, and already gives lawmakers an excuse not to protect the Florida panther. But thankfully most people still treat these 3 subspecies as subspecies. But still, this does technically raise a lot of problems in identifying if there's actually an eastern cougar population, or if these cougar sightings really are just migrants. On the surface, each of these 3 subspecies or subpopulations, whatever you want to call them, are incredibly similar in appearance, with the Florida panther being the most different due to the fact that it actually has webbed feet. Yep, I bet you didn't know cats could have webbed feet. Come on, I can't be the only person who thinks that's pretty cool. But overall, the main difference between these 3 subspecies was their habitat and ranges, with the Florida panther primarily living in flat, wetland habitats in the southeasternmost corner of the United States, while the eastern cougar mostly lived in the higher up forest of Appalachia and some of the forest in the deep northeastern states and surrounding the Great Lakes. And the western cougar we all know and love lived pretty much everywhere west of the Mississippi. Though despite its massive range and being a mostly generalistic species, the western cougar usually prefers drier upland habitats, even including some more urban areas such as LA. Sadly though, due to overhunting, in addition to habitat destruction and fragmentation, the last verified eastern cougar would be killed in 1938 in the state of Maine. Still, it was considered alive by many of the residents of the northeastern United States and Appalachia, which is why it was actually put on the endangered species list back in 1973 alongside the Florida panther. Unlike the Florida panther though, which would get much attention, the eastern cougar was largely ignored until it was classified as extinct in 2018. And when it was classified as extinct, plenty of controversy would follow. Some people claimed that the eastern cougar simply never went extinct, but was still surviving in some remote parts of Maine and Appalachia, where people simply couldn't find them, while others would simply label anyone seeing a cougar east of the Mississippi as basically being the next kook, putting the eastern cougar in the same category as everyone's favorite cryptid, Bigfoot. Unlike Bigfoot though, which would have plenty of blurry photos like this, many people would end up getting some very high resolution photos of these eastern cougars on camera, primarily in the southern Appalachian Mountains, though there would be plenty of confirmed sightings outside of this area. But are these really eastern cougars? Well, maybe. You see, the problem is that there's been plenty of cases of western cougars crossing over the Mississippi River and even traveling all the way to the East Coast. How do we know this? Well, it's simple. We've actually tracked them traveling thousands of miles across a multitude of different states undetected. Even male Florida panthers have been found traveling all the way from the Everglades into southern Georgia, likely in search for more cougars to mate with and new territory. Believe it or not, there was even one example of a cougar that traveled all the way from South Dakota to Connecticut, and this was proven by both DNA evidence and tracking. And while the process of crossing over into other populations is quite common in a lot of different species of animals, the main reason why these western cougars and Florida panthers are likely trying to expand the range is due to a lack of territory caused by habitat destruction, in addition to a lack of prey, and in the case of the Florida panther, a lack of mates as well. After all, male cougars, regardless of the subspecies, are known for traveling hundreds if not thousands of miles in the search for new territory. This is in large part what keeps the genetic gene pool of these cougars so diverse, allowing for the puma species as a whole to become incredibly adaptable due to the crossbreeding of different populations from different habitats. After all, it's almost certain that the eastern cougar also observed this behavior to some extent, as there's been plenty of reports of the eastern cougar being found all the way up in central Canada, both before and after their alleged extinction. There's even a common belief that the eastern cougar could have its own established population all the way up in Newfoundland, far outside of its expected range. But that's a whole video for another day, and if you want to see that, then please like and subscribe. And if this video does really well, I might also make a video on some of the alleged Black Panther sightings going on in the US, so please stay tuned. But if you haven't gotten the gist yet, these cougars, especially the males, regardless of the subspecies, are known for traveling very far and wide in the search for new territory. So are all the different examples of these cougars being found on the East Coast simply just western cougars and Florida panthers being found outside the range? Or are they just eastern cougars? Well, to put it lightly, with the males, it's very hard to tell, at least with photos like these. This is because cougars have, well, let's just say mine's bigger than theirs. This in turn makes cougars somewhat hard to sex just based on photos alone. But there is another way to determine if these are actual migrant cougars or not, that being if there's actually been any reports of cubs being found east of the Mississippi outside of Florida. And while it wouldn't surprise me too much if someone has found this out there, I have yet to find a single image or verified account of cubs being found east of the Mississippi outside of Florida. And unlike some other cat species, cougars are known for taking care of their young for years on end. And for this reason, if there was an actual population of eastern cougars on the East Coast, you likely would have seen them by now, with their cubs in at least one of these photos. But you should still keep in mind that the cougar is an incredibly cryptic animal, and there's still a decently high likelihood that there could be at least one mother out there with her cubs on the East Coast somewhere just waiting to be found. After all, there are multiple cougars in LA, and how many people in LA do you think have actually seen a cougar? Also, while we have yet to find a confirmed female east of the Mississippi, we have found multiple male cougars in the same areas east of the Mississippi, which does imply that there is, or at least was recently, a population present. Or better yet, that a population might become established there in the near future. In particular, the states of Tennessee and Michigan seem to have the most sightings coming from different individual cougars. And even if the eastern cougar truly is extinct, with male western cougars crossing over the Mississippi and entering the eastern half of the United States, it's only a matter of time before the females begin to follow, eventually re-establishing a proper cougar population along the East Coast and the Great Lakes. And while some people might not like the idea of having cougars at their doorstep, initially, I'm gonna tell you why it's a good thing. So back in the olden days, no, like the actual olden days when Europeans first arrived, we ended up wiping out a lot of the native animals. Starting off with, of course, the top predators, which we saw as the biggest threat to us, and our food supply. This would include most of the wolf species and cougars on the East Coast. And since Europeans initially arrived in the East, naturally the eastern half of the United States would have the largest amount of megafaunal animal decline, with the red wolf, gray wolf, and cougar being practically extinct, or at least very rare on the East Coast, by the mid-1900s. For this reason, when these top predators were wiped out, the deer population exploded. And when the deer population exploded, people ran into a few problems. One of which is the fact that deers are one of the main carriers of Lyme disease, or rather the ticks that carry Lyme disease. And when this disease is spread to a human, let's just say it does not end well. Deers also tend to spread a multitude of different diseases to a lot of the local cattle, which ranchers are trying to raise up in order for our own consumption. In other words, deers are the real menaces. And for as much as I love Bambi and his friends, deers are known for wrecking thousands, if not tens of thousands of cars each and every year in the United States, with a lot of these car crashes proving to be fatal both for the deers and people. So by having these cougars return to the eastern half of the United States, it's pretty much guaranteed that the deer population would go down and become controlled again, as cougars are specialized in basically going after all sorts of mammalian prey, such as deers and also feral hogs, which are a significant threat to the native environment. In actuality, as long as you keep your pets and children indoors at night, you're probably just as safe, if not safer, by having these cougars around. So for this reason, there has been plenty of talks about reintroducing cougars to the eastern half of the United States. Artificially, similar to what's going on with the red wolf right now, though unlike the red wolf, the reintroduction of cougars is likely to be way more successful, thanks to their more cryptic instinctual nature and the fact that they don't have to worry about hybridization with any other species. Coyotes. Sadly though, these reintroduction program ideas are still in the talking stages, mainly due to people's fear and ignorance towards these animals. Heck, some people are so ignorant they mistake bobcats for eastern cougars, which is just wild to me. Some people even believe that certain states such as Georgia are purposely trying to cover up the presence of cougars, regardless of if they're eastern or western, in their state, mainly in order to prevent public panic. If this is actually true or not is incredibly hard to say. But what is clear is that there are still a handful of cougars left in the eastern half of the United States. But regardless of what subspecies or subpopulation they are, I believe every cougar east of the Mississippi deserves our protection. As only a few hundred years ago, you could find cougars in all of the 48 lower states. So why don't we do the right thing for once and actually try to protect these incredibly magnificent creatures that do belong here? After all, cougars aren't like tigers which actively prey on people. Normally when a cougar's in an area with people, you simply won't see it and they will try their best to leave you alone. Very similar to coyotes, which I have an entire another video on, which I'm sure if you haven't seen yet, you'd love to check out. So please feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you all real soon.